The first gunshot echoed across frozen canyon walls at exactly 5:47 a.m. Gideon Vale, the richest, most feared man in the Northern Territory, stared down the barrel of a hunting rifle held by a woman he'd never seen before. She stood barefoot in the snow outside a cabin that had been abandoned for 20 years, her fingers steady on the trigger, her eyes empty of fear. "This is my home now," she said quietly. "You can kill me or leave me alone, but I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, the billionaire rancher who owned everything realized he'd just met the only person who had absolutely nothing left to lose. If you want to see how a woman with nothing defeats a man with everything, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The temperature hit 14 below zero the morning Gideon Vale discovered someone living on his land without permission. He'd woken at 4:30, like always, pulled on thermal layers in his heavy canvas coat, kissed his sleeping daughter's forehead, and walked out into darkness so complete it felt like drowning. The stable hands knew better than to speak to him before sunrise. Gideon preferred silence. Silence meant control. Silence meant no surprises. Except this morning brought a surprise that would crack his carefully controlled world wide open. He'd been riding the northern fence line for 2 hours when he spotted it. A thin column of smoke rising from Dead Man's Canyon, a forgotten gulch carved deep into the mountainside where nothing had lived for decades. The old trapper's cabin down there had collapsed years ago. At least, that's what his foreman had told him. Gideon trusted his foreman, trusted him the way he trusted his accountant, his lawyer, his head of security, which meant not completely, but enough to delegate. Apparently that had been a mistake. The canyon trail was treacherous even in summer. In January, with ice coating every rock and snowdrifts piled shoulder-high in places, it was damn near suicidal. Gideon's horse, a steel-gray gelding named Brutus, picked his way down the slope with the careful precision of an animal that understood gravity and respected it. Gideon kept one hand on the reins and the other on the rifle strapped to his saddle. He didn't know who was down there, but trespassers on Vale land usually fell into two categories, desperate or dangerous, sometimes both. The cabin came into view as he rounded the last switchback. Gideon pulled Brutus to a stop and just stared. The place had been rebuilt. Not professionally, there were gaps in the log chinkling and the roof sagged on one side, but rebuilt nonetheless. Someone had patched the walls with scrap lumber, replaced the broken door, even cleared the snow from a small area out front. Firewood was stacked against the eastern wall, protected from wind by a tarp held down with rocks. Smoke drifted from a crooked stovepipe that looked like it had been salvaged from a junkyard. Gideon dismounted slowly, his boots crunching in the snow. His breath came out in white clouds. This far into the canyon, the wind didn't reach, which made the cold somehow worse, still and heavy and patient. He was 10 feet from the door when it opened. The woman who stepped out wasn't what he expected. No wild-eyed hermit or strung-out vagrant. She looked maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a simple braid and a face that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so carefully blank. She wore men's work clothes, canvas pants, a flannel shirt, a wool coat with patches on the elbows. Her hands were raw and red from cold or labor or both, and she was pointing a rifle directly at his chest. "That's close enough," she said. Her voice was steady, not aggressive, not frightened, just matter of fact, like she was commenting on the weather. Gideon stopped walking. He didn't reach for his own rifle, didn't need to. He'd been in enough tight situations to recognize when someone was bluffing and when they meant business. This woman meant business. "You're on my land," he said. "I know. You planning to shoot me for trespassing on my own property? I'm planning to shoot you if you take another step." She tilted her head slightly. "Are you planning to take another step?" Silence stretched between them. Somewhere overhead a crow called out, the sound harsh and mocking. Gideon studied her, really looked. The rifle was old but well-maintained. Her stance was solid, feet planted, weight balanced. She'd fired a gun before, maybe grown up hunting, maybe had other reasons to learn. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Elena." "Elena what? Does it matter?" "It does if you're squatting in my canyon." "I'm not squatting. I'm surviving." She lowered the rifle slightly but didn't set it down. "I fixed the cabin, made it livable. I'm not hurting anyone or stealing anything. I just need a place to stay until spring. Spring's 3 months away. I know that too. Gideon crossed his arms. The motion made his coat creak with cold. You know who I am? Gideon Vale, richest man in the Northern Territory, owns half the county and most of the politicians. Her expression didn't change. I know exactly who you are. That's why I picked the most remote corner of your land to disappear into. Figured you had so much property you'd never notice one person trying to stay alive in a place nobody else wanted. You figured wrong. Apparently. Another silence. This one longer. Gideon had thrown people off his land before. Squatters, drifters, idiots who thought they could set up meth labs in his back country and he wouldn't find out. He'd called the sheriff, pressed charges, made examples. Gideon Vale didn't tolerate trespassing. Everyone knew that. But something about this woman made him pause. Maybe it was the way she stood there without begging or making excuses. Maybe it was the cabin behind her, rebuilt with obvious effort and skill. Maybe it was the simple fact that she'd looked him in the eye and told him the truth, when most people lied to him as a reflex. Or maybe, and this was the part that bothered him most, maybe it was because she reminded him of himself 20 years ago, when he'd had nothing but determination and a willingness to do whatever it took to survive. Put the rifle down, he said quietly. No. I'm not going to hurt you. I don't know that. If I wanted you dead, I'd have shot you from the ridge before you even knew I was here. She considered this. Then, slowly, she lowered the rifle completely and propped it against the doorframe. Fair enough. Now invite me inside. Why? Because it's 14 below zero and we're going to have a conversation. Might as well have it somewhere warm. Elena studied him for a long moment. Then she stepped aside and gestured toward the open door. Coffee's terrible, but it's hot. I'll risk it. The interior of the cabin was even more impressive than the outside. She'd built a crude but functional wood stove from scrapped metal and river stones. A narrow cot sat against one wall, covered with layers of blankets that looked like they'd been scavenged from a dozen different sources. Shelves made from planks and cinder blocks held canned goods, a few dishes, a stack of books with cracked spines. A small table and two mismatched chairs occupied the center of the single room. It wasn't much, but it was clean, organized, and clearly the work of someone who knew how to make something from nothing. Gideon pulled off his gloves and accepted the tin cup of coffee Elena poured from a battered pot on the stove. She was right. It was terrible, weak and bitter at the same time. He drank it anyway. How long have you been here, babe? He asked. 6 weeks. Where'd you come from? East. That's not an answer. It's the only one I'm giving. Gideon set the cup down. Here's the situation. This is my land. I don't lease it, I don't rent it, and I sure as hell don't give it away for free. You're trespassing. Legally, I can have you arrested or removed by force. Elena met his gaze without flinching. So do it. I'm not finished. He leaned back in the chair, which creaked under his weight. I can also make you an offer. That got her attention. Her eyebrows rose slightly. What kind of offer? I need someone to survey the remote sections of my property, check fence lines, map water sources, document any damage from the freeze. It's hard work, cold, dangerous in places. My regular hands won't do it. They think I'm crazy for even trying during winter. You probably are. Probably? He almost smiled. Almost. But it needs doing, and you look like someone who's not afraid of hard work or bad weather. Do the job through March, and you can stay here. I'll even provide supplies, food, firewood, whatever you need. When spring comes, we part ways. You go wherever you're going, I get accurate maps of my back country. Everybody wins. Elena was quiet for a long time. She picked up her own cup of coffee, wrapped both hands around it like she was trying to absorb the warmth, and stared into the dark liquid. Why? She finally asked. Why what? Why offer me work instead of just throwing me out? You don't know me, don't know why I'm here or what I'm running from. She looked up, and for the first time he saw something other than careful control in her eyes. Suspicion. Men don't help women for free, especially not men like you. So what do you really want? It was a fair question. Gideon had asked himself the same thing on the ride down into the canyon. The truth was complicated. Part of it was practical. He really did need someone to survey the property, and his regular crew was useless in winter. Part of it was curiosity. He wanted to know who this woman was and what had driven her to rebuild a collapsed cabin in the middle of nowhere just to survive. But there was something else, something he didn't fully understand himself. When he looked at Elena Marrow, and he was certain now that wasn't her real name, or at least not her full name, he saw someone who'd been pushed to the edge and refused to fall. Someone who'd lost everything and was clawing her way back without asking for pity or help. Someone who understood that the world was hard and cold and didn't give a damn about fairness, but kept fighting anyway. He saw himself. "I want an employee who's competent," he said finally. "Everything else is your business." Elena searched his face, looking for lies probably, looking for the trap. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "I want it in writing, a contract, with terms. Done? And I want a clause that says when winter ends, I'm free to leave. No strings, no obligations beyond the work. Also done. And if you try anything, I'll put a bullet in you and take my chances with the law." This time Gideon did smile, just a little. "Noted." She set down her cup, extended her hand. "Then we have a deal, Mr. Vales." He shook her hand. Her grip was strong, her palm calloused. "Call me Gideon, and get some sleep. We start tomorrow at dawn." The ride back up the canyon gave Gideon time to think about what he'd just done, about whether he was being smart or stupid, about the fact that he'd just hired a woman he knew nothing about to work on his property unsupervised for 3 months. His foreman was going to lose his mind. His lawyers were going to draft a contract so thick Elena would need a week to read it. His daughter was going to ask 1,000 questions he didn't have answers to. But as Brutus climbed the steep trail and the sun finally broke over the eastern ridge, painting the snow gold and pink, Gideon felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Interest. For years his life had been predictable. Wake up, work, make money, go to bed. Raise his daughter, manage his empire. Keep everyone at arm's length because people were unreliable and trust was for fools. It was efficient, safe. Lonely as hell, but safe. Elena Marrow, if that was even her real name, had just walked into his carefully controlled world and cracked it open. And despite every logical reason to regret what he'd just done, Gideon was looking forward to seeing what happened next. 3 days later, Gideon returned to the canyon with a contract, a map, and a pack mule loaded with supplies. Elena was outside splitting firewood when he arrived. She'd removed her coat despite the cold, and her breath came in hard white clouds as she swung the axe with practiced efficiency. She didn't stop when she heard him coming, just finished the log she was working on, set down the axe, and wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "You came back," she said. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I thought there was a 50-50 chance you'd decide I was more trouble than I was worth." Gideon dismounted and pulled the contract from his saddlebag. "I had my lawyers draw this up. It covers everything we discussed, plus a few standard clauses about liability and confidentiality. Read it carefully. Take your time." Elena accepted the papers. She didn't just skim them, she actually read every word, her lips moving slightly as she worked through the legal language. Twice she stopped and asked him to clarify specific sections. Once she caught an inconsistency between 2 clauses and made him cross it out and initial the change. By the time she finished, Gideon had unpacked the mule and was stacking canned goods and dry supplies inside the cabin. "This clause here," Elena said, tapping the paper. "It says I have to report anything unusual or suspicious I find on the property. Define unusual. Trespassers, poachers, signs of illegal activity. What about wildlife? What about it? If I see a bear den or a wolf pack, do you want to know?" Gideon considered. "Yeah, actually I do. Helps me plan hunting seasons and warn my hands that..." Elena pulled a pen from her pocket and added a handwritten note in the margin. Then she signed the bottom of the contract and handed it back to him. "There, we're official. Welcome to Vale Ranch, Miss Marrow. It's just Elena." "Elena, then." He handed her the map. "These are the sections I need surveyed. Start with the northeastern quadrant. There's a series of box canyons up there I haven't had eyes on in 5 years. After that, work your way south along the ridge. Mark any damaged fences, note water sources, and document anything else worth knowing." She studied the map, her finger tracing the elevation lines. "This is a lot of ground. You have 3 months. I'll need a horse. Can you ride?" "I can learn." Gideon almost laughed. Almost. There's a mare in my stable that's too old for hard work but steady enough for surveying. I'll have her brought down tomorrow along with tack and feed. Thank you. Don't thank me. You're earning it. He swung back into the saddle. One more thing. There's a town meeting in 2 weeks. Founders' Day celebration in Ash Hollow. I'm expected to make an appearance. You should come. Elena's expression closed down immediately. I don't do crowds. It's not optional. If you're working for me, people need to see you're legitimate. Otherwise, rumors start, and rumors cause problems. What kind of problems? The kind where somebody decides you're a threat or a target and acts accordingly. Gideon gathered the reins. The Northern Territory isn't as civilized as people like to pretend. You're a woman living alone in the wilderness. That makes you vulnerable. Being publicly associated with me makes you untouchable. Think about it. He didn't wait for a response, just turned Brutus and started back up the trail. But he heard her call after him. Gideon? He looked back. Elena stood in the snow, her arms crossed, her face still carefully neutral, but her voice was different, softer. Why are you really doing this? It was the same question she'd asked before. And Gideon still didn't have a good answer. Maybe I'm just tired of being surrounded by people who need me, he said finally. It's refreshing to meet someone who doesn't. Then he rode away before she could ask anything else. Botik. Over the next 2 weeks, Gideon found himself thinking about Elena Marrow more than he wanted to admit. His daughter Sophie asked about her constantly. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why was she living in the old canyon? Could they visit her? Gideon answered the questions he could and deflected the ones he couldn't. Sophie was 8 years old, smart as a whip, and had inherited her mother's ability to read him like a book. She knew something was different. She just didn't know what. His foreman, Ray Hutchins, was less tactful. You hired a woman to survey the back country, Ray said flatly. In winter. A woman you know nothing about. That's correct? Are you out of your damn mind? Possibly. They were standing in the main stable, watching hands exercise the horses in the indoor arena. Ray was 62, built like a fire hydrant, and had worked for Gideon since before Sophie was born. He was one of the few people allowed to question Gideon's decisions. What do you know about her? Ray pressed. Enough. Which means nothing. It means she's competent, self-sufficient, and not afraid of hard work. That's more than I can say for half the men on payroll. Ray shook his head. You're playing with fire, boss. Noted. But Ray was right, and Gideon knew it. He was taking a risk. Elena could be running from the law, could be mentally unstable, could be any number of things that would make hiring her a spectacular mistake. And yet, the first survey report arrived via one of Gideon's hands, who'd been checking the northern fence line. Elena had flagged him down, handed over a detailed map with notes written in neat, precise handwriting, and sent him on his way. Gideon spread the map on his desk and studied it. She'd documented everything, every broken fence post, every dry creek bed, every game trail and shelter point. She'd even marked a section of forest where beetle damage was killing the pines, something his own foresters had missed. The work was professional, thorough, exactly what he'd asked for. Gideon sat back in his chair and stared at the map for a long time. Ray was wrong. This wasn't fire. This was something more dangerous. Founders' Day arrived cold and clear. Ash Hollow wasn't much. A main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of other buildings clinging to existence in the shadow of the mountains. But once a year, the whole territory showed up to celebrate the anniversary of the town's founding, which mostly meant drinking, gossiping, and pretending to care about history. Gideon hated it, but he showed up anyway because appearance mattered and people expected to see him. He brought Sophie, who wore her good dress and complained about the cold. They made the rounds, shaking hands, accepting congratulations on another successful year, listening to the mayor drone on about progress and prosperity. Elena arrived alone just after noon. Gideon spotted her immediately. She'd cleaned up, traded her work clothes for a simple dark dress and wool coat, pulled her hair back into a neat bun. She looked uncomfortable, out of place, like she wanted to be anywhere else. Several people noticed her. Strangers always drew attention in small towns, especially women traveling alone. Gideon excused himself from a conversation with the county clerk and crossed the square to where Elena stood near the edge of the crowd. You came, he said. You said it wasn't optional. I appreciate you taking that seriously. She glanced around, her shoulders tight. How long do I have to stay? An hour? Maybe 2. Just long enough to be seen. Seen by who? Everyone. Before she could respond, a woman's voice cut through the noise. Gideon Vale! Is that you hiding over here? Gideon suppressed a grimace and turned to face Margaret Ashford, the self-appointed social coordinator of Ash Hollow and the worst gossip in 3 counties. Margaret, he said with forced politeness, and who is this lovely young woman? Margaret's eyes were bright with curiosity as they fixed on Elena. This is Elena Marrow. She's working for me. Working for you? Margaret's eyebrows shot up. Doing what, exactly? Property surveys. How unusual. Margaret's smile was sharp. I didn't know you hired women for that sort of thing. I hire competent people, Gideon said evenly. Gender doesn't matter. Of course, of course. Margaret turned to Elena. And where are you from, dear? Elena's expression went carefully blank. East of here. How wonderfully vague. Margaret laughed, but her eyes weren't friendly. Well, welcome to Ash Hollow. I hope you're finding our little corner of the world hospitable. It's cold, Elena said flatly. An awkward silence followed. Gideon was about to step in when a man's voice interrupted from behind them. Margaret, stop interrogating the poor woman. Gideon turned to see Thomas Brennan, the local doctor and one of the few people in Ash Hollow Gideon actually respected. I'm not interrogating, Margaret protested. I'm being welcoming. You're being nosy. Thomas smiled at Elena. Don't mind her, she means well, even if she doesn't always show it. He extended his hand. Thomas Brennan. I run the clinic 2 streets over. Elena shook his hand. Elena Marrow. Pleasure to meet you. Thomas glanced at Gideon. Treating your new employee well, I hope? She hasn't complained yet. That's not the same as treating her well. She's alive and fed. I consider that a success. Thomas laughed. Margaret looked between them, clearly trying to figure out what was happening. Elena just looked tired. If you'll excuse me, Elena said quietly. I need some air. She walked away before anyone could stop her, disappearing into the crowd. Margaret immediately rounded on Gideon. Well, she's certainly mysterious. She's private, Gideon corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Margaret's eyes gleamed. Mark my words, Gideon Vale. That woman is running from something. Aren't we all? He left Margaret sputtering and went to find Elena. He found her behind the general store, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed and her eyes closed. You all right? He asked. Elena opened her eyes. I hate this. Being here? Being looked at, being questioned, being visible. She pushed off the wall. I came here to disappear, remember? This is the opposite of that. Gideon leaned against the wall beside her. You want to know what I think? Not particularly. I think you're scared. Her head snapped toward him. Excuse me? Not of me, not of the work, but of being seen, of people noticing you exist. He met her eyes. What are you running from, Elena? That's none of your business. It is if it's going to blow back on me. It won't. How do you know? Because I'm nobody. Her voice was quiet but intense. I don't matter. I'm not important enough for anyone to come looking for. If you believed that, you wouldn't be hiding. Elena looked away. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant noise of the celebration and the wind rattling through the alley. I lost everything, she said finally. My home, my land, my husband, everything, and the man who took it from me is powerful enough that fighting back would have been suicide. She looked at him again, and this time her eyes were hard. So I ran. I disappeared. I chose survival over pride. Are you satisfied? Gideon absorbed this, processed it. What was his name? He asked quietly. Why? Because if he's powerful enough to scare you, I need to know if he's powerful enough to challenge me. Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. Nobody's powerful enough to challenge you, Gideon Vale. You're the king of the Northern Territory. Names, Elena. She hesitated. Then, almost too quiet to hear, Silas Croswell. The name hit Gideon like a punch to the gut. He knew Silas Croswell. Everyone in the territory knew Silas Croswell. Land broker, cattle buyer, real estate speculator. The man had his fingers in a dozen different businesses and a reputation for ruthlessness that rivaled Gideon's own. He was also, Gideon had recently learned, a fraud. "I've heard things about Croswell," Gideon said carefully. "Rumors about forged documents and stolen property." Elena's laugh was bitter. "They're not rumors. Tell me what happened." "Why? So you can feel sorry for me. So I can decide what to do about it." She stared at him. "You can't do anything about it. It's done. Over. I signed the papers, or he forged my signature, same result, and the land was legally transferred. There's no undoing it." "There's always a way to undo things," Gideon said, "if you have enough money and enough leverage." "And why would you use yours to help me?" It was a fair question, one Gideon had asked himself a dozen times since meeting her. "Because I don't like Silas Croswell," he said finally, "and because someone needs to stop him before he ruins anyone else." Elena searched his face. "You're serious?" "I'm always serious." "This isn't your fight. It is now." "Gideon." "Go back to the cabin," he interrupted. "Keep doing the surveys, stay out of sight, and let me handle Croswell." "You don't understand what you're—" "Elena." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I built an empire from nothing. I faced men twice as dangerous as Silas Croswell and buried them. Trust me when I say that if he hurt you, he's going to regret it." For the first time since he'd met her, Elena Merrow looked like she might actually believe him. And for the first time in years, Gideon Vale felt like he was fighting for something that actually mattered. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than usual. Sophie sat in front of Gideon on the saddle, chattering about the celebration, who wore what, who said what, how much pie she'd eaten. Gideon made appropriate sounds of acknowledgement, but his mind was elsewhere, turning over the name Elena had given him like a stone he was examining for cracks. Silas Croswell. The man was a snake. Everyone knew it, but snakes who wore expensive suits and knew the right lawyers could slither through almost anything. Gideon had crossed paths with Croswell twice before, once over a water rights dispute that Gideon had won by sheer force of superior legal counsel, and once at a cattle auction where Croswell had tried to inflate prices through dummy bidders. Gideon had walked away from that one. Not worth the energy. But this was different. This was personal in a way Gideon didn't fully understand yet. He'd built his fortune on reading people, on knowing when to push and when to pull back. Elena Merrow was damaged goods in the eyes of most people. A woman with no money, no family, no power. Easy to ignore, easier to exploit. Croswell had clearly thought the same thing. He'd been wrong. When they reached his main house, Gideon lifted Sophie down from the saddle and watched her run inside, already calling for the housekeeper to tell her all about the day's events. Ray appeared from the stable to take Brutus, giving Gideon a look that said they needed to talk, but not now, not in front of the girl. Gideon nodded and headed inside. His office was on the second floor, a large room with windows overlooking the valley and walls lined with maps, ledgers, and photographs documenting 20 years of building something from nothing. He poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey and sat behind his desk, pulling out a leather-bound notebook where he kept information on people worth tracking. Silas Croswell had his own page. Gideon skimmed the notes he'd made over the years, land deals that seemed too good to be true, widows who'd sold property at suspicious prices, a fire at a county records office that had destroyed documents related to 3 separate estates Croswell later acquired. Nothing provable, nothing that would hold up in court, just patterns that suggested a man who knew how to work the system and didn't care who got hurt in the process. Gideon added Elena's name to the page, underlined it twice. Then he locked the notebook in his desk drawer and went to find Ray. The foreman was in the tack room, oiling saddles with the methodical patience of a man who'd been doing the same task for 40 years. He looked up when Gideon entered but didn't stop working. "You gonna tell me what happened in town?" Ray asked. "Depends. You gonna lecture me about hiring Elena?" "Already did that. Didn't take." Ray set down the oil rag. "But I'm guessing something changed today." Gideon leaned against the workbench. "You know Silas Croswell?" "Unfortunately, man's a tick. Gets under your skin and sucks blood until you burn him out." Ray's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "He's the reason Elena's here." "She tell you that?" "Eventually. Ray was quiet for a moment, processing. So the girl's not just running from bad luck. She's running from a man who'll come looking if he figures out where she is. Maybe. Maybe not. Croswell doesn't strike me as the type to chase down someone who has nothing left to take. Unless she's got something he wants besides property. Gideon had thought of that. She's not talking about details yet, just that he took her land after her husband died and she couldn't fight back. Classic Croswell. Ray picked up another piece of tack and started working oil into the leather. So what are you planning to do? Find out if what he did was legal. And if it wasn't, then I'm going to make him give it back. Ray's hands stilled. He looked at Gideon with the expression of a man who'd seen his boss do a lot of crazy things over the years, but was still occasionally surprised. You're going to war with Silas Croswell over a woman you've known for 3 weeks. I'm going to war with Silas Croswell because he's a fraud and someone needs to stop him. Elena just gave me a reason to start now instead of later. That's a hell of a justification. It's the one I'm using. Ray went back to oiling the saddle. You're going to need proof. Real proof, not just her word against his. Croswell's got lawyers who can make evidence disappear faster than snow in July. I know. And you're going to need leverage, something that makes him fold instead of fight. I know that too. And you're doing all this because... Gideon met his foreman's eyes. Because it's the right thing to do. Ray snorted. Since when do you care about right versus wrong? You care about winning. Maybe those are the same thing this time. Or maybe you're thinking with something other than your brain. Gideon's expression went cold. Careful. I've known you since before Sophie was born, Ray said, not backing down. I watched you build this place. Watched you bury your wife and keep going when most men would have drunk themselves to death. I've seen you ruthless and I've seen you cold. But I've never seen you stupid. Don't start now. I'm not being stupid. Then what are you being? Gideon didn't have a good answer for that. Or maybe he did and just didn't want to say it out loud. He pushed off the workbench and headed for the door. Get me everything you can find on Silas Croswell's land deals in the last 5 years. Start with Blue Ridge County. Look for patterns, properties acquired from single women, estates in probate, anything that changed hands without a public sale. That's a lot of records to dig through. Then start digging, Ray sighed. You're the boss. Yeah, I am. Gideon left before the conversation could go anywhere else he didn't want it to go. Back in the house, he found Sophie in the kitchen with Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper who'd been raising his daughter alongside him since his wife died 5 years ago. Sophie was eating cookies and describing the Founders' Day celebration in exhaustive detail. Mrs. Chen listened with the patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed 8-year-olds, which made her worth her weight in gold as far as Gideon was concerned. Sophie looked up when Gideon entered. Papa? Mrs. Chen says I can help make dinner. Can I? If Mrs. Chen says it's all right, then yes. I did say it was all right, Mrs. Chen confirmed, giving Gideon a look that suggested she knew he was distracted and didn't approve. We're making roast chicken. Sounds good. Gideon kissed the top of Sophie's head. I'll be in my office if you need me. You're always in your office, Sophie said with the blunt honesty of childhood. Not always. Most of the time. I have work to do. You always have work to do. She turned back to Mrs. Chen, already moving on to the next thing. Can I stir the potatoes? Gideon escaped before the conversation could make him feel worse about being an absent father. He loved Sophie more than anything in the world, but raising a daughter alone while running a ranch the size of a small country wasn't easy. Most days he felt like he was failing at both. He spent the rest of the evening going through old correspondence, looking for mentions of Croswell or anything related to land transactions in Blue Ridge County. He found 3 letters from ranchers complaining about boundary disputes and one from a widow asking if Gideon knew a good lawyer because she was being pressured to sell property she didn't want to part with. Gideon made notes, drew connections, built a picture of a man who preyed on the vulnerable and hid behind legal paperwork. It was past midnight when he finally went to bed, and even then, sleep didn't come easy. The next morning, Gideon rode out to the canyon before dawn. Elena was already awake, dressed in her work clothes and saddling the old mare Gideon had sent down 2 weeks earlier. She looked up when she heard him approach but didn't stop what she was doing. You're early, she said. I need to ask you some questions. About Croswell? Yes. Elena tightened the girth strap and checked the stirrups. I already told you everything. You told me the general shape of what happened. I need details. Gideon dismounted and leaned against the fence rail. When did your husband die? 3 years ago, August. How? Fever. It was fast. Her voice was flat, reciting facts without emotion. 1 week he was fine, the next week he was buried. And the property was in his name? Both our names, joint ownership. So when he died, it should have transferred to you automatically. That's what I thought too. Elena led the mare out of the small corral and tied her to a post. But Croswell showed up 2 months later with papers saying my husband had taken out a loan against the land. Said if I couldn't pay, I'd have to sell or he'd foreclose. Did your husband actually take out a loan? No, I would have known. We didn't have debt. We were careful. Gideon processed this. So Croswell forged loan documents. That's what I believe, yes, but I couldn't prove it. The papers looked real, had signatures, notary stamps, everything, and the bank backed up his claim, said the loan was legitimate and overdue. Which bank? First Territorial in Blue Ridge. Gideon knew the bank. Small operation, family-owned, the kind of place that depended on goodwill and local relationships to stay afloat. Easy to pressure if you knew the right people. What happened next? Elena was quiet for a moment, her hand stilling on the saddle pack she was adjusting. I tried to fight it, went to a lawyer in town. He looked at the papers and told me I didn't have a case. Said even if the loan was fake, proving forgery would cost more money than the land was worth, and I'd probably lose anyway. Did you try another lawyer? With what money? My husband was dead. The land was all we had. I couldn't afford to eat, let alone hire someone to fight Silas Croswell. Her voice cracked slightly, the first real emotion Gideon had heard from her. So I signed the papers, transferred the deed, took the pittance he offered me, and left before I did something stupid. Like what? Like putting a bullet in him. Gideon believed her. Where's the land now? Last I heard, Croswell sold it to a mining company. They're pulling copper out of the hills and dumping tailings into the creek that used to run clean enough to drink from. She looked at him, and her eyes were hard. My husband and I spent 10 years building that place. We planted trees, fixed up the house, made it a home, and now it's just another hole in the ground making rich men richer. It doesn't have to stay that way. Yes, it does. That's how the world works. People like Croswell take things from people like me, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. I can do something about it. Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. Why? Because you feel sorry for me? Because what he did was illegal, and I don't like illegal things happening in my territory. This isn't your territory. Blue Ridge is 2 counties away. The Northern Territory is wherever I say it is. Gideon straightened. I'm going to need you to write down everything you remember. Dates, names, who was involved, what papers you signed, everything. And then what? You're going to ride into Blue Ridge and demand Croswell give me my land back. Something like that. That's insane. Probably. Gideon untied Brutus and swung into the saddle. But I've done insane things before and they usually work out. Write it all down, Elena. I'll be back tomorrow. He rode away before she could argue. The problem, Gideon realized as he made his way back to the main house, was that Elena was probably right. Going after Croswell based solely on her testimony would be a disaster. He needed evidence, real evidence, the kind that would hold up in court or at least apply enough pressure to make Croswell fold. Ray was waiting for him in the stable yard, holding a stack of papers that looked like they'd been copied from county records. Found something, Ray said without preamble. That was fast. I called in a favor with the clerk's office in Blue Ridge, told them I was doing property research for you. Ray handed over the papers. These are land transfers from the last 4 years involving Silas Croswell. 11 total. 8 of them were from widows or single women. 5 were sold at prices well below market value. 3 had outstanding loans that came out of nowhere right before the sale. Gideon flipped through the documents. The pattern was obvious once you knew what to look for. He's been running this scam for years. At least, and probably longer. These are just the ones I could find records for. Any of these women still around? 2 are dead, 3 moved away, the rest... Ray shrugged. Could be anywhere. Gideon studied the papers. 11 victims. 11 families destroyed. And Croswell had gotten away with it because he was smart enough to pick targets who couldn't fight back. I need to talk to the ones who are still local, Gideon said. Get their stories on record. You really going to do this? I told you I was. Ray shook his head. Croswell's not going to take this lying down. Man's got connections. Money. He'll fight back. Let him. Gideon, I didn't build this place by backing down from fights, Ray, and I'm not starting now. The foreman sighed but didn't argue further. He knew better. Gideon spent the next week doing something he almost never did, leaving the ranch for extended periods. He rode into Blue Ridge and talked to people. Not the lawyers or bankers or officials, the regular people. Shopkeepers, ranchers, the woman who ran the boarding house. Everyone had a story about Silas Croswell. Most of them were rumors or secondhand accounts, but enough were firsthand that Gideon started building a case. He found 2 of the women from Ray's list. One had remarried and moved to a small farm outside town. The other was working as a seamstress, living in a rented room above the general store. Both of them told him the same story Elena had. Sudden loans appearing after their husbands died. Pressure to sell. Documents that looked legitimate but felt wrong. And when they tried to fight, they hit walls. Lawyers who wouldn't help. Banks that backed up Croswell's claims. Courts that moved too slowly to matter. Why are you asking about this? The seamstress asked. Her name was Martha, and she was maybe 50, with tired eyes and hands scarred from needle pricks. Nobody cared when it happened to me. I care now, Gideon said. Why? Because someone I know went through the same thing, and I'm tired of watching Croswell get away with it. Martha studied him like she was trying to figure out if he was serious or just another man making promises he wouldn't keep. You're Gideon Vale. Yes. You're rich enough to make Croswell's life difficult. Very. Will you? I'm working on it. She pulled out a small wooden box from under her bed and opened it. Inside were papers, copies of the documents she'd signed, letters from lawyers, even a few photographs of the property she'd lost. I kept everything, she said, just in case someone ever cared enough to listen. Gideon took the box. May I borrow these? You can have them. I don't need reminders of what I lost. Martha closed her eyes briefly. If you actually do something about this, if you make him pay for what he did, I want to know. You will. When Gideon returned to the ranch 3 days later, he had testimony from 4 women, copies of documents from 6 different land transfers, and a growing certainty that Silas Croswell had been running the same con for at least a decade. He also had a plan. Elena was waiting for him when he rode down into the canyon. She'd finished the northeastern survey and moved on to the next section, and her maps were even more detailed than before. But she set them aside when she saw the expression on Gideon's face. You found something, she said. I found a lot of things. Gideon dismounted and pulled the stack of documents from his saddlebag. Croswell's been doing this for years. You weren't the first and you weren't the last. He targets women who've just lost their husbands, forges loan documents, and steals their property before they can recover from grief long enough to fight back. Elena took the papers and read through them slowly. Her hand started shaking halfway through. These women, she whispered. He did the same thing to all of them. Yes. And nobody stopped him. Nobody with enough power to make it matter. Gideon waited until she looked up. But that changes now. How? I'm going to confront him, tomorrow, in Blue Ridge. Elena's eyes went wide. You can't just... I can and I will. Gideon's voice was calm but absolute. I have evidence. I have testimony. I have enough to make his life very difficult if he doesn't cooperate. Cooperate how? He's going to return your land, sign whatever documents are necessary to transfer the deed back to you, and then he's going to leave the county and never come back. That's... Elena shook her head. That's not how the world works, Gideon. Men like Croswell don't just give up because someone asks nicely. I'm not asking nicely. Then what are you doing? I'm giving him a choice. Give you back what he stole, or I'll use every ounce of power and money I have to destroy him. Bankrupt his businesses, ruin his reputation, make sure he never works in this territory again. Gideon stepped closer. I've crushed bigger men than Silas Croswell, Elena, and I did it without breaking a sweat. He'll fold. And if he doesn't, then I'll make him wish he had. Elena stared at him. really looked at him, like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. Why are you doing this? It was the same question everyone kept asking. Ray, Margaret Ashford, Thomas Brennan, Elena herself, multiple times. And Gideon still didn't have a simple answer. Because it was the right thing to do? Yes, but Gideon had never let morality dictate his business decisions before. Because he hated Croswell? True, but not enough to justify the time and energy he was spending on this. Because Elena deserved justice? Probably. But there were thousands of people who deserved justice, and Gideon had never lifted a finger to help any of them. The truth, the real truth he didn't want to admit even to himself, was simpler and more complicated at the same time. He was doing this because somewhere in the last month, Elena Marrow had stopped being a stranger squatting on his land and started being someone who mattered to him. And Gideon protected the people who mattered. Because nobody else will, he said finally. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and put her hand on his arm. It was the first time she'd touched him voluntarily, and Gideon felt the weight of it like a brand. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. Wait until I actually win. You will. You sound certain. I am. Elena smiled just a little. You're Gideon Vale. You don't lose. Gideon wanted to tell her that wasn't true, that he'd lost plenty, his wife, years of his daughter's childhood to work, any chance at a normal life. But he didn't. Instead, he just nodded and turned back to his horse. I'll send word when it's done, he said. Then he rode away before he could say anything else stupid. The next morning, Gideon dressed like he was going to war. Black suit, white shirt, his father's silver cufflinks that were the only thing he'd inherited besides debt. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a man who'd built an empire through discipline and ruthlessness. Today, he was going to remind Silas Croswell what happened to people who made the mistake of underestimating him. Ray drove him into Blue Ridge in the ranch truck, neither of them speaking much on the 2-hour drive. When they arrived, Gideon went straight to Croswell's office, a brick building on Main Street with his name in gold letters on the window. The receptionist tried to tell him Croswell wasn't available. Gideon walked past her anyway. Silas Croswell looked up from his desk as Gideon entered his private office uninvited. He was a soft man in his 50s with thinning hair and expensive clothes that didn't quite hide the paunch around his middle. He frowned at the intrusion but covered it quickly with a practiced smile. Gideon Vale. This is unexpected. We need to talk, Gideon said, closing the door behind him. About? Gideon dropped the stack of documents on Croswell's desk. About the women you've been stealing from. The smile disappeared. Croswell's eyes flicked to the papers and back to Gideon. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Gideon sat down without being invited. Elena Marrow, Martha Chen, Rebecca Walsh. Want me to keep going? Because I have 8 more names and evidence for every single one. Croswell's face went carefully blank. Those were legitimate business transactions. They were fraud, forged documents, fake loans, stolen property. And I can prove it. With what? The word of a few desperate women? With testimony from 4 separate victims, copies of forged documents, and a pattern of behavior going back at least 10 years. Gideon leaned forward. I also have connections to every newspaper in the territory and enough money to tie you up in court for the rest of your life. Want to test whether your lawyers are better than mine? Croswell's jaw tightened. What do you want? Elena Marrow's property. You're going to sign documents transferring the deed back to her, effective immediately. You're also going to pay her fair market value for the 3 years she lost access to it. That's insane. That's generous. I could ask for compensation for all 8 women. Maybe I will anyway. You have no legal standing to I don't need legal standing. I need leverage, and I have it. Gideon stood. You have 24 hours to draw up the paperwork and deliver it to my lawyer in Ash Hollow. If you don't, I go to the newspapers, then the banks, then the territorial governor who happens to be a personal friend. By the time I'm done, you won't be able to sell a tin cup in this county, let alone real estate. Croswell's face had gone red. You're threatening me. I'm giving you a choice. Take it or leave it, but choose fast because my patience has limits and you just hit them. Gideon walked out without waiting for a response. He made it halfway to the truck before Croswell came running after him. Wait, Croswell said, slightly out of breath. Just wait. Gideon turned, said nothing. Croswell looked like he wanted to curse, to fight, to do anything except what he was about to do. But he was smart enough to recognize when he was beaten. "I'll have the papers ready by tomorrow," he said through gritted teeth. "Good decision." "This isn't over, Vale." "Yes," Gideon said quietly. "It is." He got in the truck and didn't look back. Ray didn't ask questions on the drive back, which Gideon appreciated. The silence gave him time to think about what he'd just done and whether it would actually work. Croswell had folded faster than expected, but men like him didn't stay down without a fight. There would be consequences. Retaliation, maybe. Or worse, publicity that would drag Elena's name through every gossip circle in the territory. Gideon had faced worse, but Elena hadn't. When they pulled up to the main house, Sophie was sitting on the front porch with Mrs. Chen, working on some kind of school project that involved colored paper and far too much glue. She looked up when she heard the truck and waved. "Papa, look what I made!" Gideon climbed out and walked over to inspect whatever creation his daughter had assembled. It appeared to be a model of the ranch, or at least Sophie's 8-year-old interpretation of it. The main house was there, lopsided but recognizable. The stables, the barn, and off to one side a small structure labeled Elena's Canyon in shaky handwriting. "That's very good," Gideon said carefully. "Mrs. Chen helped with the hard parts," Sophie admitted. "But I did all the drawing myself. See? That's Elena's cabin. I put smoke coming from the chimney because she always has a fire going." "When did you see Elena's cabin?" Sophie's eyes went wide with the expression of a child who'd just revealed something she wasn't supposed to. I didn't. I just imagined it." Mrs. Chen gave Gideon a look that said they'd discuss this later. Gideon sighed. "Sophie, you're not supposed to go down to the canyon without permission." "I didn't, I promise. I wanted to see where she lived, but I only went to the top of the trail. I didn't go all the way down." "When was this?" "Yesterday, while you were gone." Sophie's voice got smaller. "Are you mad?" Gideon knelt down so he was at eye level with his daughter. "I'm not mad, but that canyon trail is dangerous, especially in winter. If you'd fallen, nobody would have known where to look for you." "I was careful." "Careful isn't always enough." He put his hand on her shoulder. "If you want to visit Elena, ask me first. I'll take you down myself. Deal?" Sophie brightened immediately. "Really? Can we go tomorrow?" "Maybe. Let me talk to Elena first. She likes me, you know. She told me I was smart when I met her at the celebration." "You're smart. Too smart for your own good sometimes." Sophie grinned and went back to her project. Gideon stood and caught Mrs. Chen's eye. The older woman followed him into the house, leaving Sophie occupied with her glue and paper. "How long has she been asking about Elena?" Gideon asked once they were in the kitchen. "Since the day you brought her name up," Mrs. Chen said, pulling ingredients out for dinner. "She's curious. That girl doesn't have many women in her life besides me, and I'm old enough to be her grandmother. Elena's closer to what she remembers of her mother." Gideon felt that like a punch to the gut. Sophie barely remembers her mother. Exactly. Which makes Elena interesting. Mrs. Chen started chopping vegetables with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. "You should bring the woman around more. Let Sophie get to know her properly instead of building up some fantasy in her head. She's not part of our lives like that." "Isn't she? You've been obsessed with her situation for weeks now. Ray says you went to war with Silas Croswell on her behalf. That sounds pretty involved to me." "That's different. That's business." Mrs. Chen gave him a look that said she didn't believe a word of it. "Whatever you say, Mr. Vale." Gideon left before the conversation could get any more uncomfortable. He spent the rest of the evening in his office, pretending to work, but mostly staring at maps and thinking about the mess he'd created. He'd backed Croswell into a corner, which meant either the man would comply or he'd strike back. Gideon was betting on compliance. Croswell was a coward at heart, the kind of man who only fought battles he knew he could win, but there was always the chance he'd miscalculated. Around midnight, Gideon gave up on sleep and rode down to the canyon. Elena's cabin was dark, except for the faint glow of the fire through the gaps in the logs. Gideon hesitated before knocking, suddenly aware that showing up at a woman's door in the middle of the night was probably not his smartest decision. But Elena opened the door before he could reconsider, holding a lamp in one hand and looking more annoyed than frightened. Do you ever sleep? She asked. Not lately. You? Not when strange men show up at midnight. She stepped back to let him in. I'm guessing this isn't a social call. I talked to Croswell today. Elena went very still, set the lamp down on the table. And? He's going to return your land, sign the deed transfer by tomorrow, and deliver it to my lawyer. For a long moment, Elena didn't react at all. Just stood there like she was processing words in a foreign language. Then she sat down hard in one of the chairs, her legs apparently not interested in holding her upright anymore. He agreed to that, she said. Not a question, a statement of disbelief. He didn't have much choice. What did you do? I gave him evidence that could destroy his reputation and his business. Then I gave him 24 hours to fix what he'd broken or watch me burn his life to the ground. Gideon pulled out the other chair and sat. He chose to fix it. Elena put her face in her hands. Her shoulders started shaking, and for a horrible moment Gideon thought she was crying. But when she looked up, she was laughing, a raw, slightly hysterical sound that didn't have much joy in it. You just walked in and threatened him, and he folded. Yes, that's insane. I've been hearing that a lot lately. Elena shook her head, still laughing in that broken way. I spent 3 years thinking I'd lost everything forever. 3 years hiding and rebuilding and trying not to hate myself for being too weak to fight back. And you fixed it in one conversation. I had leverage he didn't expect. That's all. That's not all. Elena's expression shifted, became something Gideon couldn't quite read. You didn't have to do this. You don't owe me anything. We barely know each other. I know enough. What does that mean? Gideon didn't have a good answer for that either. He was usually better at controlling conversations, at keeping things professional and distant. But something about Elena stripped away the defenses he'd spent 20 years building. It means I don't like watching people get crushed by men who think power makes them untouchable, he said finally. And it means I'm tired of standing by while the world burns down everyone who doesn't have the money or connections to fight back. That's a very noble sentiment from a man who built his fortune crushing competitors. I never said I was consistent. Elena almost smiled. No, I don't suppose you did. They sat in silence for a while. The fire crackled. Wind rattled the shutters. Outside, Brutus stamped his feet and snorted, probably annoyed at being left in the cold while his rider sat inside drinking terrible coffee. What happens now? Elena asked. Now we wait for Croswell to deliver the papers. If he does, you get your land back. If he doesn't, I make good on my threats and destroy him. And then? And then you decide what you want to do. Keep working for me through winter like we agreed, or go back to your property and rebuild there. Elena looked away. The mining company Croswell sold to, they've been pulling copper out of those hills for 3 years. The land's not what it was. The creek's poisoned. Half the trees are gone. Even if I get the deed back, I'm not sure there's anything left worth having. Land is land. You can rebuild. With what money? I've got nothing, Gideon. Whatever Croswell pays me in compensation won't be enough to start over. Then you stay here. Work the winter season like we planned, save your wages, and figure it out in spring when you have options. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. Elena turned back to look at him, and there was something vulnerable in her expression that made Gideon's chest tighten. Why do you care what happens to me? I already told you, no. Not the noble speech about power and justice, the real reason. She leaned forward. Why does a man who trusts nobody and keeps everyone at arm's length suddenly decide to go to war for a woman he found squatting in a canyon? Gideon met her eyes, held her gaze, and for once, he told the complete truth. Because when I look at you, I see someone who refused to break even when the world gave her every reason to, and that's rare enough to be worth protecting. Elena's breath caught. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something, then closed it again. The moment stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them was ready to name. Finally, Gideon stood. I should go, it's late. Gideon, get some sleep, Elena. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He left before she could finish whatever she'd been about to say. The ride back up the canyon gave him too much time to think about the look on Elena's face and what it meant that he'd told her the truth instead of hiding behind the walls he'd built so carefully over the years. Ray was right. He was being stupid. But he didn't know how to stop. The next morning arrived cold and clear. Gideon was in his office reviewing contracts when his lawyer, James Morrison, showed up with a leather folder and an expression that suggested he had thoughts about Gideon's recent decisions. "The papers arrived an hour ago," Morrison said, setting the folder on the desk. "Delivered by messenger from Croswell's office. Everything's in order. Deed transfer, compensation payment, even a signed statement relinquishing any future claim to the property." Gideon opened the folder and scanned the documents. They looked legitimate. Proper signatures, notary stamps, legal language that would hold up in any court. "He actually did it," Gideon said. "Were you expecting him not to?" "I was expecting him to try something. A loophole, maybe. Or a delayed transfer that would give him time to retaliate." Morrison sat down, uninvited. He was in his 60s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, and had been Gideon's lawyer since before Sophie was born. "What you did was risky, Gideon. Croswell has connections. He could make trouble for you if he wanted." "Let him try." "I'm serious. You threatened a man's livelihood and reputation based on evidence that's mostly circumstantial. If he decided to fight back, he won't. Men like Croswell only fight when they think they can win. I made it very clear he couldn't win this one." Morrison sighed. "And what exactly is your relationship with this Elena Marrow?" "She works for me." "As what?" "Because property surveying doesn't usually inspire this level of personal investment." Gideon gave him a flat look. "Are the papers legal or not?" Or, "They're legal, but that doesn't mean this is over. Croswell signed because you backed him into a corner, not because he had a change of heart. Men like that don't forget." "Neither do I." Morrison stood, picking up his briefcase. "I'll file these with the county recorder today. Miss Marrow should have full legal ownership by end of week." He paused at the door. "For what it's worth, what you did was the right thing, even if it was also reckless and potentially disastrous. That's how I prefer my good deeds. Reckless and potentially disastrous." After Morrison left, Gideon sat staring at the papers for a long time. He'd done it. Actually done it. Taken on Silas Croswell and won, returned Elena's stolen property, and proven that sometimes justice actually worked if you had enough money and leverage to force it. So why did he feel like he just created more problems than he'd solved? Sophie burst into his office around noon, which was against house rules, but she did it anyway because 8-year-olds had their own rules. "Mrs. Chen says we're having a celebration dinner," she announced. "She won't tell me why. Is it because of Elena?" "How do you know about Elena?" "I heard you and Mr. Morrison talking. I wasn't spying," she added quickly. "I was just walking past the office and the door was open and voices carry." "Uh-huh. So is it true? Did you get her land back?" Gideon debated how much to tell his daughter, and decided honesty was probably better than whatever fantasy she'd construct on her own. "Yes. A man stole Elena's property after her husband died, and I convinced him to return it." "Convinced or threatened?" "Sophie, Ray says you can be very threatening when you want to be." "Ray talks too much." Sophie climbed into the chair Morrison had vacated, her feet dangling several inches off the ground. "Is Elena going to leave now?" "I don't know." "Do you want her to leave?" "That's her decision, not mine." "But do you want her to?" Gideon looked at his daughter, who was watching him with the kind of perception that children sometimes had, the ability to see through adult deflections and get straight to the heart of things. "No," he admitted. "I don't want her to leave." Sophie smiled like she'd just won something. "Good. I like her. She's not fake like the other ladies in town, and she doesn't talk to me like I'm stupid." "When did you have a conversation with Elena?" "At the celebration, while you were talking to Mr. Brennan. She asked me about school and actually listened when I answered instead of just nodding and looking around for someone more important to talk to." Gideon filed that information away. "What else did you two talk about?" "Books, mostly. She said she used to be a teacher before." Sophie trailed off, her expression going uncertain. "Before something bad happened. She didn't say what. Before her husband died and she lost her home." "Oh." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "That's really sad." "Yes, it is." "Is that why you helped her? Because you felt sad for her?" "Partly. Also because what happened to her was wrong and somebody needed to fix it." and that somebody was you. Apparently, Sophie kicked her legs back and forth, thinking. Mama used to say that being rich meant you had to help people who couldn't help themselves. She said money was only good if you used it for something besides buying stuff. Gideon felt his throat tighten. He didn't talk about his wife much, mostly because it hurt too much and Sophie barely remembered her. But sometimes his daughter would say something that sounded exactly like something her mother would have said, and Gideon would remember all over again what he'd lost. Your mama was right, he said quietly. So you helped Elena because of what Mama taught you? Maybe. Or maybe I just did it because it needed doing. Sophie slid off the chair and walked around the desk to hug him, which she didn't do as often as she used to. Gideon hugged her back, feeling the weight of fatherhood and responsibility and the constant fear that he was screwing up this whole parenting thing. I think you did a good thing, Papa, Sophie said into his shoulder. Thanks, sweetheart. Can we invite Elena to the celebration dinner? I'll ask her. Good. Sophie pulled back and grinned. Mrs. Chen is making her special roast chicken, and I want Elena to try it because it's really good, and maybe then she'll want to stay. Gideon watched his daughter run out of the office, her footsteps echoing down the hallway, and wondered when exactly his life had gotten so complicated. He rode down to the canyon that afternoon with the deed transfer papers in his saddlebag, and a knot of uncertainty in his chest that he couldn't quite explain. Elena was working on the roof when he arrived, hammering new shingles over the sections that had started leaking. She looked up when she heard Brutus and climbed down the ladder with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent half her life doing physical labor. You're early, she said. I have news. Her expression shifted immediately. Good news or bad news? Good. Mostly. Gideon dismounted and pulled out the folder. Crosswell delivered. The deed transfer is complete. The land is yours again. Elena took the papers like they might explode. She read through them slowly, her lips moving as she processed the legal language. Halfway through, she had to sit down on the porch steps, her hands shaking. This is real, she whispered. Yes. He gave it back, with compensation for the 3 years you lost access. Not as much as I wanted, but enough to be meaningful. Elena stared at the papers. Then she started crying. Not the broken laughing from the night before. Real tears running down her face while she tried to wipe them away with the back of her hand and failed. Gideon stood there feeling helpless, which was not an emotion he was comfortable with. He was good at solving problems with money and threats and legal maneuvering. He was terrible at dealing with other people's emotions. I'm sorry, Elena managed. I never thought I'd get this back. I spent 3 years believing it was gone forever, and I'd just have to live with that. You don't have to apologize for having feelings. I barely know you, and I'm crying on your porch. That feels like something I should apologize for. You're allowed to cry. You just got your life back. Elena wiped her face again, this time with more success. What do I do now? Whatever you want. The land is yours. You can sell it, rebuild on it, or just hold on to it while you figure things out. The mining company is being evicted. Morrison's already filed the paperwork. They have 60 days to remove their equipment and restore the land to its original condition or face penalties. They won't do that. They will if they want to keep operating in the Northern Territory. I own enough land around their other sites to make their lives very difficult if they don't comply. Elena shook her head slowly. You really did just fix everything. I told you I would. I didn't believe you. Most people don't, right up until I prove them wrong. She almost smiled at that, folded the papers carefully, and held them against her chest like they were something precious. Thank you, Gideon. I don't have better words than that, but thank you. You're welcome. He paused. Sophie wants to know if you'll come to dinner tonight. Mrs. Chen is making her special roast chicken to celebrate. Celebrate what? You getting your land back. Sophie's been invested in your situation ever since she found out you existed. I met her at the celebration. She's a sweet kid. She's trouble disguised as a sweet kid. But yes. Gideon shifted his weight, suddenly feeling awkward. You don't have to come. But the invitation's genuine. Elena looked at him for a long moment. All right, I'll come. Good. Be at the main house by 6. He left before the conversation could get any more uncomfortable, which seemed to be his strategy lately. Say something meaningful, then run away before he had to deal with the consequences. Ray caught him in the stable when he got back. "Heard you're having Elena over for dinner," the foreman said. "News travels fast." Sophie told half the ranch hands while they were working the south pasture. She's excited. She's 8. Everything excites her. Ray gave him a look. "You sure you know what you're doing?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." "That woman's been through hell, Gideon. She doesn't need you playing hero and then changing your mind when things get complicated." "I'm not playing hero. I'm just—" Gideon stopped, tried to figure out how to finish that sentence. "I'm trying to do the right thing." "The right thing for who? For her or for you?" "Does it matter?" "Yeah, it does." Ray crossed his arms. "Because if you're doing this because you genuinely care about her, that's one thing. But if you're doing it because you're lonely and she's the first person in years who didn't want something from you, that's different, and it's not fair to her." Gideon wanted to argue, wanted to tell Ray he was wrong, that this wasn't about loneliness or need or any of the messy emotional complications Ray was suggesting. But he couldn't, because Ray wasn't wrong. "I'll figure it out," Gideon said finally. "You better, because that woman deserves better than being someone's emotional experiment." Ray walked away before Gideon could respond, leaving him alone with Brutus and the uncomfortable realization that maybe he didn't have this situation as under control as he thought. Dinner that night was the most awkward meal Gideon had experienced in years. Elena showed up exactly at 6, wearing the same dress she'd worn to the Founders' Day celebration and looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Sophie greeted her like a long-lost friend, immediately dragging her inside to show her the ranch model she'd made. Mrs. Chen smiled and welcomed her warmly. Ray kept his distance but watched everything with the expression of a man waiting for disaster. They sat down to eat, and for the first 10 minutes, nobody said much. Sophie filled the silence with chatter about school and horses and a book she was reading about explorers. Elena listened and responded when appropriate, but Gideon could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held her fork like she wasn't sure it would be there if she looked away. "So," Mrs. Chen said eventually, because someone had to break the adult silence. "Gideon tells us you got your land back." "Yes," Elena said quietly. "Thanks to him." "That must be a relief." "It is. I still don't quite believe it's real." "It's real," Gideon said. "Morrison filed the paperwork this afternoon. You're the legal owner of record." Sophie looked up from her chicken. "Are you going to move back there?" The question hung in the air. Everyone looked at Elena. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "The property isn't what it was. The mining company damaged it pretty badly, and even if I wanted to rebuild, I'm not sure I could afford to." "You could stay here," Sophie said immediately. "We have lots of room, and you already have the cabin in the canyon." "Sophie," Gideon said quietly. "What?" "It's true. Elena could keep working for you and living in the canyon, and then she wouldn't have to leave." Elena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's very sweet of you, Sophie, but I can't stay in your father's canyon forever." "Why not?" "Because it's not mine, and because I have my own land now." "But your land is broken. Papa could help you fix it." "Sophie," Gideon said again, with more force this time. "That's enough." His daughter went quiet, looking between him and Elena like she was trying to figure out what she'd said wrong. The rest of the meal passed in uncomfortable small talk. Elena praised Mrs. Chen's cooking, which was genuinely excellent. Sophie asked 1,000 questions about teaching and what books Elena liked. Ray excused himself early, claiming he had work to do, which was probably true but also convenient. After dinner, Gideon walked Elena outside while Sophie helped Mrs. Chen clean up. "I'm sorry about that," he said. "Sophie doesn't always understand boundaries. She's a kid. Kids ask uncomfortable questions." Elena pulled her coat tighter. "But she's not wrong. I don't know what I'm doing next. I got my land back, but I don't have the money to make it livable again. And I can't exactly keep squatting in your canyon indefinitely." "You're not squatting. You're working for me under contract. A contract that ends in spring. So we extend it, or we draw up a new one." Gideon shoved his hands in his pockets. "The point is, you have options now. You don't have to decide everything tonight." Elena turned to face him. "What do you want me to do, Gideon?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've gone to extraordinary lengths to help me. You threatened a powerful man, got my land back, invited me to dinner with your daughter. You don't do things like that without having some kind of expectation." I don't expect anything from you. Everyone expects something. That's how the world works. Gideon met her eyes. I expect you to make the choice that's best for you, nothing else. And if I choose to leave, then I'll wish you well and mean it. And if I choose to stay? That was the question, wasn't it? The one Gideon had been avoiding thinking about too hard because the answer was complicated and messy and went against every instinct he'd developed over 20 years of keeping people at a safe distance. Then we figure out what that looks like, he said finally. Elena studied his face like she was looking for something. You're a strange man, Gideon Vale. I've been told that. Most men would have demanded something in return by now. Money, loyalty, or... She trailed off. I'm not most men. No, you're really not. She stepped closer, close enough that Gideon could smell the wood smoke in her hair and see the exact color of her eyes in the porch light. I don't know how to accept help without it coming with strings attached. Then learn, because this doesn't have strings. Everything has strings. Not this. They stood there in the cold, the space between them charged with something Gideon didn't have a name for. Elena looked like she wanted to say something else, argue or thank him or push him away, but instead she just nodded. I should get back to the canyon, she said. I'll ride with you. It's dark. I can manage. I know you can, but I'm riding with you anyway. They saddled up in silence and rode down the trail together, Elena on the old mare and Gideon on Brutus. The moon was bright enough to light their way, turning the snow silver and the shadows black. Neither of them spoke much. There didn't seem to be much left to say. When they reached the cabin, Elena dismounted and stood for a moment with her hand on the mare's neck. Gideon? Yeah? For what it's worth? I'm glad it was you who found me that morning instead of someone else. So am I. She smiled then, a real one, and disappeared into the cabin. Gideon rode back up the canyon thinking about choices and consequences and the fact that he'd just made his life infinitely more complicated by caring about a woman who didn't trust easy kindness and had every reason not to. Ray was right. He was being stupid. But for the first time in years, being stupid felt like the smartest thing he'd ever done. The weeks that followed settled into something that almost looked like routine, which made Gideon nervous because routine meant comfort, and comfort meant vulnerability. He'd spent 20 years avoiding both. Elena continued surveying the remote sections of the ranch, sending back detailed reports that were better than anything Gideon's regular crew had ever produced. She mapped water sources his own hands didn't know existed, identified structural problems with fences that had been slowly failing for years, and even spotted signs of poachers working the eastern boundary. Information that led to 3 arrests and solved a problem that had been costing Gideon thousands in lost cattle. She was good at the work. Better than good. And somewhere along the way, Gideon stopped thinking of her as an employee and started thinking of her as something else entirely. Something he didn't have words for yet. Sophie made it worse by asking about Elena constantly. When was she coming back to dinner? Could they invite her to Sophie's school concert? Did Elena like horses because Sophie wanted to show her the new foal? Every question was innocent on the surface, but felt like a test Gideon wasn't sure how to pass. Mrs. Chen watched the whole situation with the knowing expression of someone who'd seen this movie before and knew exactly how it ended. She didn't say much, but the look she gave Gideon spoke volumes. Ray was less subtle. You're in trouble, he said one morning while they were checking inventory in the equipment barn. And I don't mean the legal kind. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. That woman's gotten under your skin and now you don't know what to do about it. Gideon didn't bother denying it. She's complicated. So are you. That's the problem. I'm handling it. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you're doing what you always do, throwing money and effort at something without actually dealing with the messy human parts. I got her land back. I gave her work. What else am I supposed to do? Ray set down the clipboard he'd been holding. You're supposed to figure out what you actually want from her, and then you're supposed to be honest about it instead of pretending you're just being helpful. I am being helpful. You're being terrified. There's a difference. Gideon wanted to argue but couldn't, because Ray was right. He was terrified, not of Elena herself, but of what wanting her meant. He'd locked himself away after his wife died, built walls so high nobody could climb them. It was safer that way. Cleaner. No mess, no risk, no chance of losing someone he cared about ever again. Elena was making those walls irrelevant, and Gideon didn't know how to stop it. 3 weeks after the dinner at the main house, Elena showed up at Gideon's office unannounced. It was late afternoon, the sun already sinking behind the mountains and painting everything gold and purple. She looked windburned and exhausted, like she'd been riding hard all day. "We need to talk," she said. Gideon set down the contract he'd been reviewing. "About?" "My land. I went to look at it yesterday." "And?" Elena pulled off her gloves and tossed them on his desk. "It's worse than I thought. The mining company stripped the topsoil from half the acreage. The creek's so full of runoff chemicals, nothing will grow within 50 feet of it. They cut down every mature tree for lumber and left the slash to rot. Even the house is gone. They tore it down for salvage." Gideon absorbed this. Morrison said they had 60 days to restore the land. They're not going to restore anything. They'll do the minimum required to avoid penalties and then disappear. I'll be left with property that's technically mine, but practically worthless. So we sue them for damages. With what evidence? They can claim the land was already damaged when they bought it from Croswell. We'd spend years in court and probably lose anyway. She was right, and they both knew it. Environmental restoration was expensive. Improving damage was hard when the people responsible had money for lawyers who specialized in making evidence disappear. "What do you want to do?" Gideon asked. Elena sat down heavily in the chair across from him. "I don't know. That's the problem. I spent 3 years dreaming about getting that land back, thinking if I could just reclaim what was stolen, everything would be okay. But now I have it, and it's ruined, and I don't know what to do with it." "Sell it." "To who? Nobody's going to pay fair price for contaminated property." "Then hold on to it. Wait for the market to shift." "While I do what? Keep living in your canyon forever?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them wanted to address directly. "The canyon's not forever," Gideon said carefully, "but you can stay as long as you need to figure things out." "That's not a plan, Gideon. That's stalling." "What's wrong with stalling?" "Everything. I can't build a life on borrowed space and temporary work. Eventually, I need to figure out what comes next." "So figure it out. Nobody's rushing you." Elena looked at him with an expression that was part frustration and part something else. "You are the most infuriating man I've ever met. I've been told that before. You don't understand. Normal people don't just float indefinitely. We need plans, structure, some idea of where we're going to be in 6 months. Why? Because that's how life works." "Not for everyone." Gideon leaned back in his chair. "I spent 20 years planning every detail of my life. Where I'd be, what I'd accomplish, how much money I'd make. And you know what happened? My wife died anyway. All those plans meant nothing when she got sick. I learned pretty fast that the only plan worth having is dealing with what's in front of you and adapting when things change." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't know your wife died." "Most people don't. I don't talk about it." "How long ago?" 5 years, cancer. She fought it for 18 months and then she was gone." Gideon heard his own voice like it belonged to someone else, flat and factual. "Sophie barely remembers her. Sometimes I think that's worse than if she remembered clearly." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'm just making a point. Plans don't protect you from anything. They just make you feel like you have control when you don't." Elena studied him. "Is that why you live the way you do, keeping everyone at a distance?" "I don't keep everyone at a distance." "Yes, you do. Ray told me you haven't had a real friend outside of staff in years. You don't date, don't socialize unless it's business. Don't let anyone close enough to matter. Ray talks too much. He cares about you, so does Mrs. Chen. They're worried." "They don't need to be. I'm fine." "Are you?" The question was soft, but it hit like a hammer. Gideon looked at Elena, really looked at her, and saw someone who'd been broken the same way he had, just by different circumstances. She understood loss. Understood what it meant to rebuild when everything familiar was gone. "Most days," he admitted. "Today, I'm not sure." Elena reached across the desk and put her hand over his. It was the second time she'd touched him voluntarily, and Gideon felt it like an electric shock. "We're a mess, aren't we?" she said quietly. "Yeah, we are." "What are we doing here, Gideon?" "I don't know, but I don't want to stop." Elena pulled her hand back slowly. "I should go. It's getting late." "Stay for dinner. Sophie would want to see you." Sophie wants to see me because she's trying to fix something she thinks is broken. Maybe it is broken. Maybe that's okay. Elena stood, picking up her gloves. I'll think about it. The dinner invitation, I mean. And the other stuff. What other stuff? All of it. She paused at the door. You got my land back, Gideon. Nobody's ever fought for me like that before. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that information except say thank you and mean it more than I've meant anything in a long time. She left before he could respond. Gideon sat in his office for a long time afterward, staring at the place where her hand had been on his desk, and thinking about choices and consequences and the fact that he was in way deeper than he'd intended to be. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Morrison showed up at the ranch just after sunrise, which was unusual enough that Gideon knew something was wrong before his lawyer even opened his mouth. We have a problem, Morrison said, settling into the chair across from Gideon's desk. Silas Croswell filed a lawsuit yesterday afternoon against you, against Elena Marrow, and against the county for what he's calling fraudulent land transfer under duress. Gideon went very still. Explain. He's claiming you threatened him, coerced him into signing documents he didn't understand, and engaged in extortion to force the deed transfer. He wants the whole thing reversed and is seeking damages for defamation and business losses. That's insane. He signed those papers voluntarily. Did he? Because according to his filing, you showed up at his office uninvited, made threats against his livelihood, and gave him 24 hours to comply or face ruin. That's textbook coercion. Gideon felt rage building in his chest, cold and controlled. He stole that land through fraud. I have evidence. Evidence you obtained how? Through legal discovery, court order, or by digging through county records and interviewing witnesses without any official authority? Morrison leaned forward. Gideon, I warned you this was risky. You threatened a man based on circumstantial evidence and forced him into a corner. Now he's fighting back the only way he knows how, through the courts. So we fight him, present the evidence, prove he's a fraud. It's not that simple. His lawyers are good. They're already arguing that even if he did engage in questionable practices with other properties, that doesn't prove he did anything wrong with Elena's land specifically. And without concrete evidence of forgery, which we don't have because the original loan documents are conveniently missing, we're going to have a hard time proving coercion wasn't the real motivation behind the transfer. What about the other women? Their testimony is hearsay unless we can get them to testify in court, which most of them won't do because they're scared of retaliation. And even if they did, it just proves a pattern. It doesn't prove this specific case. Gideon stood and walked to the window, looking out over the valley. The sun was burning off the morning frost, turning everything bright and sharp. He'd been so certain that getting Elena's land back was the right thing to do. So sure that having money and power meant he could force justice where it wouldn't come naturally. He'd been wrong. What are my options? He asked without turning around. Settle. Give Croswell some money to go away, reverse the land transfer, and hope he doesn't push for criminal charges. No. Gideon, no. I'm not giving him anything, and I'm not reversing that transfer. Elena earned that land. It's hers. Then you need to prepare for a fight that's going to be expensive, public, and potentially disastrous for your reputation. Let it be disastrous. I'm not backing down. Morrison sighed. I'll start preparing our defense, but you need to tell Elena what's happening. This affects her too. After Morrison left, Gideon stood at the window for a long time, watching ranch hands move cattle between pastures and thinking about how quickly good intentions could turn into disasters. He rode down to the canyon an hour later. Elena was outside chopping wood, the axe rising and falling with mechanical precision. She didn't stop when she heard him approach, just kept working until the log split clean through. You heard, she said. Not a question. Morrison told you? He stopped here first, figured I should know before you showed up. Elena set down the axe and wiped her forehead. So Croswell's suing us? Me, mostly. You're just collateral damage. That's not how it works, and you know it. My name's on those documents. I'm the one who supposedly coerced under duress. You didn't coerce anyone. I did. We both did, according to Croswell's lawyers. And honestly, Gideon, they're not completely wrong. You did threaten him. Because he's a thief and a fraud. Which we can't prove. Not in a way that will hold up in court. Elena picked up another log and positioned it on the chopping block. Morrison says we should settle. I'm not settling. Why not? If we fight this and lose, I end up worse off than before. At least if we settle, we walk away clean. Clean except Croswell keeps your land and gets away with everything he did. Maybe that's the price of avoiding a bigger disaster. Gideon grabbed the axe before she could swing it. You don't believe that. I don't know what I believe anymore. Elena's voice cracked. I got my land back for 3 weeks, Gideon. 3 weeks of thinking maybe the world wasn't as broken as I thought. And now it's all falling apart again, and I'm back where I started, except worse, because now I know what it feels like to win and then lose anyway. We haven't lost yet. We will. Men like Croswell always win. That's how the system works. Not this time. Elena pulled the axe from his grip. You can't just force the world to be fair through sheer stubborn determination. Watch me. This isn't your fight anymore, Gideon. It's mine, and I'm telling you to let it go. No. I'm serious. Drop the case. Settle with Croswell. Give him whatever he wants. I don't need my land back if it means destroying your life to get it. Gideon stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her eyes and the way her jaw was clenched tight enough to break teeth. You think I'm doing this just for you? Aren't you? I'm doing this because what Croswell did was wrong, because he's hurt people and gotten away with it for years, and somebody needs to stop him. You're part of that, yes. But this is bigger than one piece of stolen property. That's a nice speech. Doesn't change the fact that fighting him could ruin you. So what? I've got enough money to survive being ruined. What I don't have is enough pride to walk away from this fight. Elena shook her head. You're impossible. I've been told that too. They stood there in the cold, breath steaming between them, locked in a stalemate neither wanted to break. Finally, Elena dropped the axe. If we're doing this, we do it right. No more threatening people in their offices, no more cowboy justice. We build an actual case with real evidence and proper legal procedure. Agreed. And if it looks like we're going to lose, we settle. I'm not letting you destroy yourself over my problems. Those aren't the terms I'm accepting. Those are the only terms I'm offering. Gideon considered. Weighed pride against pragmatism, stubbornness against strategy. Fine. We do it your way. But when we win, and we will win, you're keeping that land. If we win, I'm keeping it, but I'm not counting on miracles. Good. Neither am I. I'm counting on evidence and leverage and the fact that Croswell made mistakes he doesn't know we can prove yet. Elena almost smiled. You have a plan. I always have a plan. It's just usually a bad one. That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. The lawsuit moved forward with the slow inevitability of legal proceedings. Depositions were scheduled, documents were filed, and Morrison worked 18-hour days building a defense that relied heavily on proving Croswell's pattern of fraud across multiple properties. The problem was getting evidence. Most of the women Croswell had targeted were too scared to testify. The banks that had backed his fraudulent loans suddenly couldn't find records. Even the county clerk who'd helped Ray pull documents the first time got nervous when lawyers started asking questions and stopped cooperating. Gideon threw money at the problem, hired investigators to track down missing paperwork, brought in forensic accountants to trace Croswell's financial dealings, even paid for 2 of the women to relocate temporarily so they'd feel safe enough to give statements. It still wasn't enough. 2 months into the lawsuit, Morrison sat in Gideon's office with an expression that said everything without words. We're going to lose, Gideon said before his lawyer could speak. We might. The judge is leaning toward Croswell's version of events. She doesn't like that you took matters into your own hands, and she's skeptical about the pattern evidence because we can't definitively prove forgery in Elena's specific case. What about the other properties? Circumstantial. Suspicious, yes, but not proof. Morrison pulled off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Croswell's lawyers are painting you as a bully who used wealth and intimidation to force an innocent businessman into surrendering property, and they're doing it well. So we settle. I think that's the smart move, yes. Gideon stared at the maps on his wall, the territory he'd built from nothing through determination and refusal to accept defeat. He'd never backed down from a fight in his life, had never let money or power or fear dictate his choices. But this wasn't just about him anymore. Set up a meeting, he said quietly, with Croswell and his lawyers. Let's see what they want. Morrison looked relieved. I'll make the arrangements. After he left, Gideon sat alone in his office and did something he hadn't done in years. He admitted he might be wrong. The settlement meeting was scheduled for the following week in Blue Ridge, at a conference room in the bank where Croswell did most of his business. Gideon brought Morrison. Croswell brought 3 lawyers and an expression of smug satisfaction that made Gideon want to hit him. "Gentlemen," Croswell's lead attorney said, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Vine, "thank you for agreeing to discuss terms." "Let's skip the pleasantries," Gideon said. "What do you want?" Vine slid a document across the table. "Full reversal of the deed transfer, public apology for defamation, and $2 million in damages for business losses." Morrison choked. $2 million? That's absurd. My client's reputation has been severely damaged by Mr. Vale's accusations. We believe $2 million is more than fair. Gideon read through the settlement terms. They were designed to humiliate him. Public apology meant admitting he'd been wrong, that he'd threatened an innocent man, that everything he'd said about Croswell was a lie. $2 million was pocket change to Gideon, but it was the principle that burned. "No," he said. Vine's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me?" I said no. "I'm not apologizing for telling the truth, and I'm not paying damages for stopping a fraud." "Then we'll see you in court, and I promise you, Mr. Vale, you will lose. Judge Hendricks has already indicated she's sympathetic to our argument. You'll not only lose the case, you'll face potential criminal charges for extortion." "Let her charge me. I'll fight it." Morrison put a hand on Gideon's arm. "Could we have a moment to discuss this privately?" They stepped outside the conference room. Morrison looked like he wanted to strangle his client. "Are you insane?" Morrison hissed. "They have us over a barrel. If we don't settle, you're looking at criminal charges. Do you understand what that means?" "I understand perfectly." "Then why?" "Because Elena was right. We can't prove Croswell forged those documents. We can't prove the loan was fake. All we have is circumstantial evidence and testimony from scared women who might not even show up to testify. But you know what we can prove?" "What?" "That Croswell is desperate. Look at those settlement terms. Public apology, $2 million, immediate transfer. He's not trying to be fair. He's trying to crush me completely, which means he's scared we might find something." Morrison stared at him. "You're bluffing." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm buying time to find the evidence we need." "Gideon, we don't have time. The trial is in 3 weeks." "Then we better work fast." They went back inside. Gideon sat down and looked Croswell directly in the eye. "Counteroffer," he said. "We delay the trial by 60 days. During that time, both parties agree to continue discovery, but no further motions or press releases. If at the end of 60 days we haven't found evidence of fraud, I'll accept your settlement terms, all of them." Croswell's lawyers exchanged glances. Vine leaned forward. "Why would we agree to that?" "Because if you don't, I'm going to make this the ugliest trial this county has ever seen. I'll drag it out for years. I'll appeal every ruling. I'll make your client's life so miserable he'll wish he'd never heard my name." Gideon smiled without warmth. "Or you can take 60 days, let me chase ghosts, and then collect your $2 million when I come up empty. Your choice." Vine looked at Croswell, who nodded slowly. 60 days, Vine said, "but the settlement terms stand. If you don't find proof of fraud by then, you accept everything, including the public apology." "Agreed." They shook hands like civilized people who weren't imagining ways to destroy each other. Outside, Morrison looked at Gideon like he'd lost his mind. "Please tell me you actually have a plan. I have 60 days to find one." "That's not a plan. That's a prayer." "Then start praying," Gideon said, "because we're going to need all the help we can get." Elena was waiting at the canyon when Gideon rode down that evening. She'd built a fire outside despite the cold and was sitting on a stump watching flames climb into the darkening sky. She didn't look up when he dismounted. "Morrison called me," she said. "Told me about the settlement meeting." "Of course he did. He also said you're an idiot for buying 60 days we can't use." "He's probably right." Elena finally looked at him. "Why'd you do it?" Gideon tied Brutus to the rail and walked over to the fire. The heat felt good after the cold ride. "Because giving up felt wrong." "Wrong doesn't win court cases." "No, but it's all I've got right now." He sat down on another stump across from her. "I spent the last 2 months throwing money at investigators and lawyers, trying to build a case from scattered evidence and testimony from people too scared to come forward. And you know what I learned? That you can't buy justice." That justice is a luxury most people can't afford, which makes it not justice at all, just another commodity for people with money. Gideon stared into the fire. I always knew the system was rigged. I just never cared before because it was rigged in my favor. Elena was quiet for a moment. So what changed? You did, and the women Croswell destroyed, and the fact that I have a daughter who's going to grow up in this world, and I want it to be better than what we've got now. That's a tall order for 60 days. I'm aware. They sat in silence, watching the fire burn down to coals. Finally, Elena spoke again, her voice soft. If we don't find evidence, if you have to accept that settlement, I need you to know it's okay. I survived losing everything once. I can do it again. You shouldn't have to. But I can. That's the point. I'm not breakable, Gideon. I'm already broken and still standing. Whatever happens, I'll be fine. Gideon looked at her across the fire. This woman who'd rebuilt a collapsed cabin with her bare hands and refused to beg for mercy when a billionaire showed up on her doorstep. You're the strongest person I've ever met. I'm just stubborn. Same thing. Elena smiled, just a little. So what's the plan for the next 60 days, besides praying for miracles? We go back to the beginning. Find the original loan documents Croswell claims your husband signed. If they exist, they're either real or forged. Either way, we need them. I looked for those documents 3 years ago. They're gone. Gone where? Croswell said they were filed with the bank. But when I asked the bank, they said their records were destroyed in a fire. Gideon felt something click in his mind. What fire? The county records office. It burned down about 6 months after I lost my land. They said it was an electrical problem. Let me guess. A lot of property records were destroyed in that fire. Most of them, yes. Why? Because Morrison's notes mentioned a records fire when he was researching Croswell's other properties. Which means it wasn't an accident. Elena's eyes widened. You think Croswell burned down the records office? I think it's convenient that the one place that would have proof of his fraud went up in flames. And I think if we can prove arson, we can connect it to Croswell and blow his whole operation open. That's a lot of thinking and not much proof. Then we find proof. Gideon stood. Who investigated the fire? County fire marshal, I think, but that was 3 years ago. Doesn't matter. Investigations leave paper trails. We just need to follow them. The next morning, Gideon drove to Blue Ridge and tracked down the fire marshal who'd investigated the records office fire. His name was Daniel Ortiz, and he was a grizzled man in his 50s who looked like he'd seen too much smoke and not enough justice. I remember that fire, Ortiz said when Gideon explained what he was looking for. Bothered me at the time, still bothers me now. Why's that? Because the official report said electrical malfunction, but the burn pattern didn't match. Looked more like accelerant to me, something poured and lit deliberately. But I couldn't prove it, and the county commissioners wanted it closed fast because they needed to rebuild and didn't want the insurance company dragging things out. Did you document your concerns? In my personal notes, yeah, but not in the official report. I was overruled by my supervisor. Can I see those notes? Ortiz studied Gideon. You're Gideon Vale, the man suing Silas Croswell. Being sued by him, actually, but yes. Croswell's a snake, always has been. Ortiz pulled out a keyring and unlocked a filing cabinet in the corner of his office. I kept copies of everything because I had a feeling someone might come asking one day. Took you longer than I expected. He handed over a folder thick with photographs, diagrams, and handwritten notes. Gideon flipped through them, his pulse quickening as he saw what Ortiz had documented. Burn patterns that suggested multiple ignition points, evidence of accelerant in 3 separate locations, and a timeline that showed the fire started in the middle of the night when no one should have been in the building. This is arson, Gideon said. That's what I thought, but without witnesses or physical evidence of who did it, I couldn't prove anything. What about security cameras? Building didn't have any. County claimed they couldn't afford them. Convenient. Very. Ortiz leaned back in his chair. Look, I don't know if this helps your case or not, but if you can connect that fire to Croswell and prove he burned those records to hide fraud, I'll testify. I've been waiting 3 years for someone to care enough to ask. Gideon shook his hand. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You still have to prove it. Gideon took the folder and drove back to the ranch, his mind already working through possibilities. The fire investigation gave them motive and opportunity, but they still needed something connecting Croswell directly to the arson. A witness, a payment record, anything that would prove he'd orchestrated the destruction of evidence. He spent the next week buried in financial records, cross-referencing Croswell's business expenses around the time of the fire. Morrison assigned 2 associates to help, and they worked 18-hour days chasing paper trails that seemed to go nowhere. Then Ray found something. "Boss, you need to see this," Ray said, appearing in Gideon's office late one night with a stack of papers. "I was talking to one of the hands who used to work in Blue Ridge, and he mentioned that his cousin did odd jobs for Croswell around the time of the fire, so I tracked down the cousin. And he remembers being paid $500 cash to help move boxes of files out of a storage unit the night before the records office burned. Said Croswell told him it was legitimate business, but he always thought it was weird that they did it at midnight, and Croswell made him sign something saying he wouldn't talk about it." Gideon went very still. "Where are those files now?" "The cousin doesn't know. He helped load them into a truck, and that's the last he saw of them." "Can he testify?" "He's willing to, yeah, but it's just his word against Croswell's unless we can find those files or prove where they went." Gideon thought about this. Croswell wouldn't have destroyed the original documents. They were his insurance policy, proof that the loans were real if anyone ever questioned the transfers. He'd have kept them somewhere safe, somewhere he could access them if needed. "Morrison," Gideon called, loud enough that his lawyer appeared from the next room where he'd been working. "If you wanted to hide documents that proved fraud, where would you put them?" "Safe deposit box, offshore account, maybe a storage unit under a false name." "Croswell's too careful for a storage unit, but a safe deposit box." Gideon stood and started pacing. "Which bank would he use?" "First Territorial, it's where he does most of his business." "Can we get access to his box?" "Not without a court order, which we can't get without evidence, which is the whole problem." Gideon stopped pacing. "What if we don't need access? What if we just need proof the box exists and what's in it?" "How would we get that?" "I know someone who works at First Territorial, owes me a favor from when I helped her son get into college." Gideon grabbed his coat. "It's a long shot, but it's the best one we've got." The next morning, Gideon met with Patricia Chen, no relation to his housekeeper despite the shared name, in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the bank. She was a loan officer in her 40s who'd been working at First Territorial for 20 years. "I can't give you access to customer records," she said immediately when Gideon explained what he needed. "That's illegal, and I'd lose my job. I'm not asking for records. I'm asking you to confirm whether Silas Croswell has a safe deposit box at your bank." "That's still confidential information. What if I told you those documents in his box are evidence of fraud, that he's been stealing property from widows for years?" Patricia's expression hardened. "I'd say that doesn't surprise me. Croswell's had that box for 15 years and he visits it maybe once a year. Always alone, always insists on privacy. Banking regulations say we can't ask what's in the boxes, but we all have our suspicions." "Can you tell me the box number?" "No. But I can tell you that if someone were to present a valid court order to access Box 247, we'd be legally obligated to comply." Gideon smiled. "Thank you. I didn't tell you anything." "I know. But thank you anyway." With the box number, Morrison was able to petition the court for access based on the arson evidence from Ortiz and the testimony from Ray's contact about moving files. It took 2 weeks of legal maneuvering, but Judge Hendricks, the same judge who'd been skeptical of their case, finally agreed to issue a limited order allowing them to inventory the contents of Box 247. The day they opened it, Gideon, Morrison, Elena, and a court-appointed witness crowded into the small vault room at First Territorial, while a bank officer used 2 keys to unlock the long metal box. Inside were documents, hundreds of them, loan agreements, property deeds, signed contracts, all the paperwork Croswell had supposedly filed with the bank, but claimed had been destroyed in the fire. Elena's hand shook as she pulled out a folder with her name on it. Inside was the loan agreement Croswell had claimed her husband signed. She read it carefully, then looked up at Gideon with tears in her eyes. "This isn't his signature," she whispered. "Look at the R in Marrow. My husband always looped it twice. This only has 1 loop." Morrison immediately called in a forensic handwriting expert. Within 3 days, they had official confirmation that the signature on Elena's loan documents was forged. Not just similar to her husband's handwriting, actually forged, probably traced from another document and altered slightly. But the box held more than just Elena's papers. There were 8 other files, each one documenting a property transfer that followed the same pattern. Forged signatures, fake loans, stolen land. Everything Gideon had suspected but couldn't prove was right there in a safe deposit box Croswell had been too arrogant or too stupid to destroy. Morrison worked with prosecutors to build a criminal case. Within a week, Silas Croswell was arrested on charges of fraud, forgery, and arson. His lawyers tried to fight it, but the evidence was overwhelming. The documents in the safe deposit box proved everything. The civil lawsuit collapsed immediately. Croswell's attorneys withdrew all claims and issued a formal apology to both Gideon and Elena. The deed transfer was confirmed as legitimate, and Elena officially became the legal owner of her property again, this time with documentation that no one could challenge. But Gideon wasn't finished. He used his connections and his money to pressure the mining company that had destroyed Elena's land. Threatened lawsuits, environmental violations, and regulatory investigations until they agreed to fund a complete restoration of the property. It took 6 months of work, but they cleaned the creek, replanted trees, and even rebuilt the house that had been torn down. Not exactly as it was, but close enough that Elena cried when she saw it. Through all of this, something shifted between Gideon and Elena. They didn't talk about it directly. Neither of them was good with words when it came to feelings, but it was there in the way they looked at each other, the way their conversations lingered longer than necessary, the way Sophie started treating Elena like family without anyone officially declaring her as such. The spring thaw came late that year. When it finally arrived, Elena rode up to the main house one afternoon and found Gideon in his office, reviewing contracts like always. "I went to see the property today," she said from the doorway. Gideon looked up. "And?" "The restoration company finished last week. The house is done, the land is healing, the creek runs clear again." She stepped inside and closed the door. "It's beautiful, better than I remembered." "Good, that's good. I could move back there, start over. Build the life I thought I'd lost." Gideon felt something cold settle in his chest. "You could." "But I'm not going to." He blinked. "What?" Elena sat down in the chair across from him. "The property in Blue Ridge was my old life, the one I had with my husband before he died. And it's a good life, a valuable piece of land, something I'm grateful to have back. But it's not where I want to be anymore." "Where do you want to be?" "Here, with you and Sophie and Ray and Mrs. Chen and this ridiculous empire you've built in the middle of nowhere." She met his eyes. "If you'll have me." Gideon couldn't speak for a moment, just stared at this woman who'd walked into his life uninvited and somehow become essential to it. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, "letting people close, trusting someone not to leave or die or disappear. I know. I don't know how to accept help without waiting for the other shoe to drop. We're both terrible at this." "So what do we do?" Elena smiled. "We figure it out together, make mistakes, fix them, keep trying until we get it right, or at least right enough." That's not much of a plan. It's better than what we had before, which was nothing. Gideon thought about plans and control and the fact that every time he'd tried to force life into predictable patterns, it had fallen apart anyway. Maybe the answer wasn't having a better plan. Maybe it was accepting that some things couldn't be planned at all. "I can't promise this will work," he said. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for a chance." "Then you've got it." Elena stood and walked around the desk. She took his hand, and Gideon felt the same electric shock he'd felt the first time she'd touched him, only now it didn't scare him quite as much. "We're going to mess this up sometimes," she said. "Probably. And it's going to be hard and complicated and nothing like either of us expected. I'm counting on it." She laughed, and the sound filled something in Gideon that had been empty for 5 years. They told Sophie that night over dinner. Mrs. Chen pretended to be surprised, even though she'd obviously seen it coming for months. Ray just nodded and said it was about time. Sophie asked if this meant Elena was going to live at the ranch permanently, and when they said yes, she cheered so loud the ranch hands probably heard it in the bunkhouse. The following week, Gideon had builders start construction on a proper house for Elena. Not in the canyon, but on the high ground overlooking the valley, where she could see everything from the mountains to the eastern pastures. She insisted on helping with the design, and they fought about everything from window placement to roof pitch. It was the best kind of fighting, the kind where both people cared enough to have opinions. While the house was being built, Elena officially joined the ranch operation as head of land management. She hired 2 assistants and implemented systems for tracking water sources, monitoring fence lines, and managing grazing rotation that increased efficiency by 30% in the first year. The ranch hands who'd been skeptical about taking orders from a woman learned pretty quickly that Elena knew more about land management than most of them had forgotten. Word spread through the Northern Territory that Gideon Vale had taken on Silas Croswell and won. Other people who'd been victimized by Croswell started coming forward, and Gideon quietly helped fund legal action to restore their stolen properties. He didn't make a big deal about it, didn't want publicity or recognition. Just did it because it needed doing, and he had the resources to make it happen. Croswell went to prison for 7 years. His business empire collapsed. The people he'd hurt got some measure of justice, even if it came too late for some of them. But the real change happened in smaller, quieter ways. Sophie grew closer to Elena, finding in her the mother figure she'd been missing. Mrs. Chen finally had another woman in the house to talk to. Ray stopped worrying quite so much about Gideon working himself to death. And Gideon himself discovered that letting someone into his carefully controlled world didn't destroy it. It made it bigger, messier, better. Elena's house was completed in early summer. It was a beautiful structure, all wood and stone and windows that let in light from every direction. She moved in on a Saturday, and that night Gideon rode over with Sophie to see how she was settling in. They found her on the porch, sitting in a rocking chair and watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. "This is really something," Gideon said, leaning against the railing. "It is," Elena agreed. I keep expecting to wake up and find out this was all a dream." "It's not a dream. It's real. You earned it. We earned it. You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. You'd have figured it out eventually. Maybe, but it would have taken a lot longer and hurt a lot more." She looked at Sophie, who was exploring the house with the enthusiasm of a child who'd been given permission to run wild. "Thank you, Gideon, for everything. Stop thanking me. We're partners now. That means we help each other." "Is that what we are? Partners?" "Among other things." Elena smiled. "What other things?" Gideon sat down in the rocking chair next to hers. Sophie's laughter drifted out from inside the house. The sun was sinking below the mountains, and the first stars were starting to appear in the darkening sky. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'm looking forward to finding out." They sat there as darkness fell, 2 people who'd been broken by loss and betrayal, but refused to stay broken. They'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances. A billionaire rancher who trusted no one, and a woman with nothing left to lose. And somehow, impossibly, they'd built something real from that unlikely beginning. It wasn't perfect. They still fought about stupid things and made mistakes and occasionally drove each other crazy. Elena's property in Blue Ridge sat empty for another year before she finally decided to sell it and use the money to fund a legal aid fund for victims of property fraud. Gideon continued to be terrible at expressing emotions and better at throwing money at problems than actually talking about them. Sophie grew up watching 2 adults figure out how to love each other without any instruction manual, which probably taught her more about real relationships than any fairy tale ever could. But they made it work. Day by day, choice by choice, they built a life together in the Northern Territory that was bigger and stranger and better than anything either of them had imagined possible. Years later, when people asked how they met, Elena would smile and say she'd been squatting in a canyon and Gideon had been too stubborn to throw her out. Gideon would add that she'd pointed a rifle at him, and somehow that had been the beginning instead of the end. And both of them would agree that sometimes the best things in life came from the moments when you stopped trying to control everything and just let yourself be broken and rebuilt by someone who understood what it meant to survive. The Northern Territory changed too. Slowly, quietly, it became known as a place where justice actually mattered, where people with power used it to protect the vulnerable instead of exploiting them. Not perfectly, no place ever was, but better than it had been, better than most places. And at the heart of it all was a ranch that sprawled across thousands of acres, run by a man who'd learned that strength wasn't about walls and control, and a woman who'd proven that losing everything didn't mean you were defeated. They'd both been broken. They'd both survived, and together they'd built something worth surviving for. That, in the end, was what mattered. Not the money, or the land, or the victory over Silas Croswell. Just two people who'd refused to let the world's cruelty turn them cruel, who'd fought for justice when it would have been easier to walk away, who'd chosen each other when choosing nothing would have been safer. The canyon where Elena had first rebuilt that collapsed cabin stood empty now, but Gideon kept it maintained. Sometimes he'd ride down there alone and remember the morning he'd found smoke rising from a place that should have been abandoned. The morning his carefully controlled life had started falling apart in all the best ways. He'd tell people later that he'd saved Elena Marrow from a bad situation. But the truth was more complicated than that. They'd saved each other. And in doing so, they'd proven that sometimes the most broken people are exactly the ones strong enough to build something beautiful from the ruins.
Scotland. Stoutland. What the fuck is that? Why do I have this little dog guy? Who the hell is that?
Dude, I don't even know any of the Pokemon on my team.
Mustache. Oh. Kind of funny.
I'll say goodbye to the Dragonius.
These people are so bad, including me. I just can't fight this fucking Camille, bro.
My whole lanes, so I'm gonna come help you actually.
Yeah, I got the. I hit her to get the cannon.
We're not getting that drag.
She's running away. She has like vision or something.
I'm ganking her.
You coming, bro? Are you coming or what, man? Like, fuck, you're actually trolling me, bro. I'm lagging, never mind.
I'm coming, James.
Did you actually give me the dog because of the mustache? That's funny. Oh, shit. How would I describe him, Bajingus? Nice and friendly, attention span of a fly, mama's boy, cider lover, a unique in thought process, anxiety of a chihuahua, mustache of a mariachi band player, loyal guy. Dude, that's pretty good. Daddy did really good.
Help me, James.
I'm here. I'll peel you.
Oh, I'm dead. There's no feeling that. I'm trolling. Oh.
I can delay.
GG. They can't end. But...
Peel this, and then you catch a fucking thresh hook with your face. This thresh is smurfing, bro. Nice and friendly, I am.